ever get the urge to roll the dice, so to speak. Well, today we're taking a deep dive into the world of gambling, tracing its roots all the way back from those ancient games of chance to those, well, flashing casino floors we all know and maybe love.
It's fascinating stuff.
You might not have thought you were signing up for a history lesson when you asked for this deep dive, but trust me, it's going to be a fascinating journey.
Oh, absolutely. The reach that gambling has is incredible. I mean, it's everywhere in our world. And it's been around for literally millennia.
It's funny you should say that because, get this, the Wikipedia article we're looking at mentions evidence of gambling even before written history. We're talking Paleolithic era.
Wow.
Really makes you wonder what those bets even look like back then, right?
That is fascinating to think about. Maybe they wagered on the success of a hunt or who could create the most intricate cave paintings. Whatever it was, it really suggests that risk-taking, that allure of reward is a part of us. Like it's deeply woven into our nature.
It's like this primal urge to test our luck against the unknown.
Right.
And speaking of testing our luck, around 3000 BCE, the Mesopotamians, they were already rolling six-sided dice. But here's where it gets interesting. Those dice, they actually evolved from even older gambling tools called astragali. Have you ever heard of those?
Astragali. Now, those weren't your perfectly symmetrical cubes that we see at the casino today.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Imagine this. They were rolling these uneven, these unpredictable animal knuckle bones. Talk about taking the game of chance to a whole new level.
Knuckle bones. That just seems so much more, well, intense than anything happening in Vegas.
It really highlights how, gambling has transcended cultures and millennia. In ancient China, during the first millennium BCE, gambling houses were already a common sight.
Wow.
And we can't forget about the Romans with their love of chariot races and gladiatorial combat. Talk about high-stakes wagering.
It's incredible how gambling wasn't just some, side hustle back then. It was ingrained in these societies. And it wasn't always about just, winning money, was it?
Exactly. The article even mentions how a lot of these early forms of gambling actually served, really important social functions.
Oh, interesting.
Remember those Mesopotamian animal fights we were talking about?
Yeah.
Those weren't just for entertainment. They were often tied to religious rituals or even used to settle disputes.
So it's a fascinating blend of entertainment, social custom, and even spirituality.
Exactly.
So from knucklebones and caves to elaborate gambling dens, it seems like us humans, well, we've always had a soft spot for a good wager.
It really does make you wonder, is there something about that thrill of uncertainty, that anticipation of a big win that just speaks to us on a fundamental level?
Speaking of shifting attitudes and big wins, let's fast forward a few centuries to a queen who seemingly enjoyed a wager or two herself, Queen Elizabeth I. Big wins is right. Now, where were we? Oh, yeah, Queen Elizabeth I, a bit of a gambling enthusiast herself, you could say.
More than just an enthusiast. In 1569, she established the very first English lottery.
A queen starting a lottery. That's wild.
And it wasn't just about the thrill of it all. It was a strategic move. The lottery was intended to raise funds for public works projects.
So using gambling for, the greater good, kind of like our state-run lotteries we have today. Makes you wonder, did they debate the whole government-sanctioned gambling thing back then like we do now?
Oh, absolutely. The debate surrounding the ethics and the social impact of gambling has been going on for centuries.
It's crazy how some things never change. But then, for a while there, it seemed like America was trying to change everything. Early 20th century in the U.S., gambling was practically outlawed everywhere. You'd think that would have been the end of it.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But, well, human desire is a powerful thing, especially when it comes to risk and reward. Prohibiting something doesn't always make it disappear. Sometimes it just pushes it underground.
Yeah, and sometimes with consequences you don't expect.
Exactly.
It's like the rise of organized crime. I mean, the connection between gambling and, the mob, it's practically a cliche now, but it just shows you how badly people wanted to gamble, even when it was illegal.
A classic example of how prohibition can sometimes backfire. Instead of getting rid of gambling, the U.S. government accidentally helped create a whole bunch of criminal enterprises.
Talk about a lesson in unintended consequences, huh? But then, fast forward to the late 20th century, and what happens? Attitudes towards gambling change again. Laws loosen up, and bam.
The casino boom. Las Vegas, Atlantic City, tribal casinos, you name it. Gambling was back in a big way. Really shows you how social norms, economic factors, even morality, they all play a role in shaping how we view and interact with gambling.
It's like we go through these cycles of trying to rein it in, then embracing it, then trying to control it again. But you know what I find fascinating? Even more than the history, it's the psychology behind it all. I mean, it's not just about the money, is it? There's something else that makes us want to, well, take that chance.
Oh, for sure. There's this whole web of psychological biases that come into play when we gamble. A lot of it's happening on a subconscious level, too. And to really understand why gambling is so alluring, we have to understand these biases.
Okay, so let's unpack some of those biases. I know our listeners probably wondering the same thing I am. Why do we gamble? Is it really all about that dream of winning big?
Well, sure, that dream is a big part of it, but it goes deeper. Think about how easy it is to overestimate the likelihood of something happening if it's something we want to happen, like our favorite team winning it all, or that lottery ticket being the lucky one.
Or even something as simple as flipping a coin. There's this feeling, when you're on a roll, like there's no way you can lose. I think we've all felt the gambler's high at some point or another.
Absolutely. And that feeling, that sense of control, even if it's an illusion, it's powerful stuff. And it ties into another bias, the gambler's fallacy.
Ah, yes, the gambler's fallacy. The idea that if you flip heads 10 times in a row, tails has got to be next.
Right. But logically, each flip is its own thing, right? But our brains, they love to find patterns, even when those patterns don't actually exist.
Are you saying that casinos and online gambling sites, they're designed to use these psychological tricks against us?
Let's just say they're very much aware of them. All those flashing lights, the sounds of celebration when someone wins big, that's not just for show. It's all very carefully planned to activate those reward centers in our brains, reinforcing those feelings of excitement, of anticipation.
It's like they know exactly how to push our buttons, even if we don't realize those buttons exist.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of all this, to gamble responsibly. We need to be mindful of how these psychological factors can influence us, especially now when gambling is so accessible.
It's a good point. It makes you wonder, though, where exactly is the line between gambling and other types of risks we take? I mean, we hear terms like calculated risk and investment all the time. Are those just like fancy ways of saying gamble?
Now, that's a great question, and it's something the Wikipedia article actually touches on. It's really interesting to think about, too, what really separates a true investment from just straight-up gambling.
Right.
A few key factors come to mind. Things like, economic utility, the possibility of positive returns in the long run, and whether there's something actually there, an underlying asset with some intrinsic value.
So like buying a house, I mean, even though it feels like a gamble sometimes, especially in this market, it would still be considered an investment, right? Because you're buying a physical thing, something that could actually go up in value.
Exactly. And with investments, you usually have some element of research, analysis, a strategy for managing that risk. It's not just left up to chance.
Unlike, say, picking a horse at the Kentucky Derby because it has a cool name.
You got it. Though you do bring up a good point. What about something like insurance? You're paying premiums, basically betting that something bad is going to happen. Is that gambling?
I've always wondered that. It feels like it could be.
And you're not wrong to think that. In a way, insurance does have a wager element to it, but the goal is different. With insurance, you're not trying to win, at least not in the traditional sense. You're trying to protect yourself from loss. It's about safety, not necessarily making a profit.
So less about beating the odds and more about like managing them.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to something pretty thought-provoking. When we really broaden our perspective, we start to see that life, like just everyday life, involves calculated risk. It's about weighing potential outcomes, even if we don't always realize it.
Wait, are you saying my morning commute is a gamble?
Well, think about it. Every time you leave the house, you're making a judgment call.
Right.
Traffic, weather, that surprise construction you always forget about. You weigh those risks against the reward of, actually getting to work on time. We're constantly making these kinds of calculations, usually without even thinking about it.
Wow, that's a pretty wild way to look at things. So we're all gamblers then, just trying to navigate the odds of everyday life.
It seems that way, doesn't it? Every decision, no matter how small or how big, has some degree of uncertainty to it. We're all making bets on an unknown future.
Well, on that note, I think it's safe to say we've successfully navigated our way through this deep dive into gambling, from those ancient games of chance to the psychology behind taking risks, from Queen Elizabeth's lottery all the way to the rise of Vegas, and even those everyday gambles we take without realizing it.
And through it all, we've seen how this activity, this uniquely human activity, really reflects so much about us. Our desire for reward, our complex relationship with risk, that uncertainty, that unknown, it's fascinating.
We hope you've enjoyed this journey as much as we have, and that you're walking away with a new perspective. Until next time, keep those mental wheels turning. And remember,